Humankind is not appreciably different today than we were 6,000 years ago, if in fact we are any different at all. Only our knowledge base and technology have increased, but we are no better, no more intelligent, no more civilized, no less violent, no wiser, and certainly no more evolved. Any statement to the contrary only underscores our ignorance and our arrogance. Hello, and welcome to Dystopian Deep Dives with your host, Natalie Donna. Today I'm speaking with Gary Wayne. He is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. We'll be talking about the Knights Templar, their connection to Hitler, and other things. Stay tuned for an interesting episode. Hi Gary, thank you for joining me. You've written a book about the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Can you briefly tell us what the Genesis 6 Conspiracy is?
Yeah, when I talk about the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, what I'm referencing is the aftermath and sort of the fallout of the angelic rebellion that unfolds into Genesis 6 with the creation of the Nephilim, or the giants, as the King James Version would phrase it, with giants going back to the word Nephil and the I am being the male plural. And the partnership between the angels, the descendants of Cain, and the creation of the mystical religions and the secret societies that all come together to usurp the kingships before the flood.
Right.
And enslave humankind and leave the world into apocalypse, and then reoccurs again after the flood and has been going on ever since, and is really the essence of what's going to bring about the end time.
Right. So do you think that's why prehistory has been so hidden from us?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think a lot of the information has been held from us, and it's been controlled. And it's been controlled by not just one organization or sort of one side of it, although I guess you could argue they're hiding the information. It's all directionally causing the same sort of deceptions. But you've got, in the modern era, you have the Gnostics and the secret societies that are collecting all of this information and using it for their own control and timing in terms of how they want to release that kind of information. You also have the Vatican that's been collecting the same kind of information for the last 2,000 years. And again, I think they are using that to control the information and to maintain power as well. And I also think that there's been a corruption ongoing with the Catholic Church that will come to a level that will absolutely astonish people in the end time as we, get ready for all of the deceptions that are coming. So I think it's about controlling that information so that they can prepare humankind to receive the information in the format and the way that they want so that they can bring about Antichrist.
And so how do the Knights Templar figure into this narrative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when I talk about secret societies, let me just sort of premise that the Templars are a secret society and that secret societies have their beginning in Genesis. And in fact, Freemasonry, which is the modern form, they would be better called Masons, which is more their ancient form. And the Masons take their history back to the patriarchs of the Cainite line, which they tend to also conflate with the Sethian line, because the names are very, very similar and there's identical names in each. So when I talk about Enoch, we need to, I want people to understand that there are two Enochs. One is the son of Cain, one is the son of Jared. And they both write scripture. They both have a significant influence on prehistory. And Enoch, son of Cain, is one of the great patriarchs of Masonry and splits the knowledge that Adam learned and taught to Cain and also taught to Seth later on. But Cain takes that knowledge towards evil and corrupts that information. Enoch, his first son, he separates it into the 7 sacred sciences, as they called it in ancientology, and that's the knowledge that will then marriage in the time of the creation of the giants with the knowledge that comes from the fallen angels that's going to propel and accelerate the antediluvian world into apocalypse. So
Right.
now that I sort of put that on the table, let's look at the Knights Templar. And the common story with the Knights Templar is that, there are these poor monks that form this ascetic type of knighthood that is going to protect pilgrims on the way to pilgrimage to Jerusalem, because the Crusaders had just recently taken Jerusalem back from the Muslims, and the Templars and the original founders were kind of part of that whole process and crusade that's going on. The thing is, though, is that the members of the Knights Templars aren't poor knights. And the Templars are going to be the modern sort of genesis or naissance to secret societies as we would understand all of them today. So they're a very, very important organization. And so when I look at, and I'll name just a few of them here, we won't go through every one of them and their connections, but they're either sons of kings or they're still within the elite, and for the most part, further down siblings or offspring of the kings who are going to become part of the religious class and monks, and usually agnostic, monastic orders. And so you've got people like Godfrey de Bouillon, Hugh de Payon, for example, who are probably the two most prominent members of the founders of the Knights Templar, as well as a fellow that's named because his name is so famous, is going to be the folk of Anjou. And these three have kingships in the Lorraine region. So they're all relatively close together and very tightly related, and all claim bloodlines back to the Merovingian bloodline and to the last survivor of the Merovingians, who was Dagobert. And of course, those bloodlines go back into prehistory, and with several different graftings in. The most notorious would be the grafting in of the original bloodlines of the Nephilim, with Judaic bloodlines and being grafted in afterwards. So you have these people that are forming this organization, and they were all Masons. Because if you're going to understand secret societies, you need to understand the aspect of the mystical religion, which is the Gnostic religion that they hold, and that the bloodlines are at the upper end of the hierarchy of the secret societies. So when we understand that, that sort of begins the modern secret society organizational structure that we know of it in the West, and we understand that they were royal bloodlines, and that they were Masons already at depth level that are forming this organization, and then they're going to be funded by the royal families, who are, of course, of the same Gnostic belief system, which would be, at that time, would be more commonly called the Cathars and the Albigensians, which were two sister religions of Gnosticism that was rivaling the Catholic and the Roman Church for dominance at that time. And so you have the Cistercians, which is one of these monastic orders that are going to be a significant sponsor for the Knights Templar and the writing of their charter. And Saint Bernard is the most famous of those Cistercian Benedictine monks, who actually argues in favor of the papal bull to form the Knights Templar and give them the power that they have initially, but also is the one who helps write their doctrine and their constitution.
Right.
So you have, again, these Gnostic orders that are molded into Catholicism that are there to build churches, and that's how they find a way to hide and be useful within the church. But secretly, they work just as the Templars did. They worship polytheism and a pantheon of gods at the adept level.
Right. You were just talking about their constitution. What do they believe in? What are some of the tenets of their constitution, if you're familiar enough with it?
Well, it's typical Gnosticism, and so when you understand that you have the Albigensians and the Cathars that are writing the Constitution, you'll understand that you're going to get that Gnostic sort of language that is in there, like the perfecti, for example, which is the adept level. And so one of the key things that's in there, other than, I'll talk about Gnosticism in a second, but in Article 4 and 18 of the Secret Rule of the Order, as set down by the Master Ronsolin, is, lays it out quite clearly that the ultimate goal of the Knights Templar is to establish the new Babylon within the Roman Church, and to establish a universal religion through that church. And that's what they're trying to do within the Catholic Church when the Templars are formed. So the Gnostics are a polytheist religion. They believe in a pantheon of gods, and if you look at who the Templars were worshiping in secret, that would be Baphomet, or Baphomet, as I would pronounce it, because it's only a single T and there's no E on the end. And that's a goat god.
Right.
And
you say that the goat gods are coming from the fall of the seraphim, right? Like after
that's how I would. That's how I would understand it. We get Satyr, which is where the goat god, comes from, and the devil gods coming out of the Bible, and they all go back to Satyr. And what that is not only is it described as a goat god when you take that back to Hebrew, but you have a degradation that goes on of the impassioned angels for sure, and probably all of the fallen angels, and a separation. Some go to the abyss, like Azazel does as the leader of the Seraphim Watchers, and then some who are still out there who are roaming around and deceiving humankind. But when you get depictions in the occult of Azazel, he's depicted as a goat god, but yet he was a watcher. And the watchers were, as I said, seraphim angels that are recorded in Isaiah 6, which have a serpent face, not a goat face. And these are the same watchers recorded 3 times in Daniel 4 that have a commission from the throne for governance. And these are the same watchers, seraphim angels, that have minister duties before the altar and within the fiery stones before God. And the Gnostics also describe these watchers as seraphim and sons of God and angels, and with that serpentine look. And so you get sort of confirmation from both sides that they were serpentine, but yet Azazel somehow transforms into a goat god, just as you have a second goat that is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16 in the King James Version Bible, and that's where scapegoat goes back to Azazel, which is recorded in some of the other English translations as such. And again, that's probably for the sins of the antediluvian world, because Azazel is the scapegoat for all of the sins of the antediluvian world, and is blamed for bringing the antediluvian world to its knees in the book of Enoch, and teaching the world not only war, but making the weapons of war and the tactics of war and all of the martial arts to go with it. So he's kind of the destroyer god of the antediluvian world, who gets blamed for the most part as a scapegoat. But yet he wasn't originally that way, and yet he's worshipped as that. And you have these other gods that show up that have sexual connotations and mythologies about that show up that are more, I would say, after the flood, post-Diluvian in their dating than before the flood, which happens with the Watchers on Mount Hermon and probably other creations of Nephilim type creatures after that, but still before the flood. So you get gods like Bacchus out of the Roman pantheon, or Cernunnos out of the English pantheon, or Cern, which is another form of Cernunnos, and the Pan god, which is the most famous one out of Greek mythology. And, you have that Pan temple at Caesar Philippi, right on the foot of Mount Hermon. And you also have Rephaim that show up after the flood. So one wonders whether or not these post-Diluvian accounts of these gods are more the second incursion of these giants after the flood to recreate the giants, and they're all degraded to these goat gods from where they came, just as Satan would have been reduced as from cherubim and seraphim down to Satan status. So I think that's probably where you get the root of the sort of the goat god, is that degradation of the seraphim watchers.
Interesting. Well, the reason I became interested in the Knights Templar was because of possible connections to Nazis and Nazism. There's a lot of sort of overlap. We have like the symbol of the Red Cross, for example. Do you notice an overlap there? You do speak a bit about Nazism in your book. Is there a direct connection? Some people think that the Knights Templar, after they sort of dispersed, part of them went to Switzerland, and part of the money that funded Hitler was from this Swiss faction of the disbanded sort of Knights Templar. Do you know anything about that theory?
Well, there's a number of connections, and you've touched on a number of things, and I'll just sort of try and walk through that as simply as possible, because this thing has about 1,000 different doors you could open in
Right.
terms of talking and connecting those knots. So the first thing that somebody needs to understand is there was more than one knight order that was quite famous and powerful at that time, and some of those even continue to this day. So you actually had an order that was created before the Templars in about 1040 AD with the Knights of St. John, and they're going to take their name after John the Baptist, whom they're going to adopt as an Essene, which is sort of the naissance of the monastic orders for polytheism in the West that will take their rituals into the Masonic societies, and then also when they're being persecuted, the Gnostic and polytheist sects by Catholicism will mold into the Catholic Church, which are part of the same orders like the Calabrian monks and the Cistercians and all of those specific orders that were formed back then that were sort of helping form the Knights Templar. But the Knights of St. John is another order that is created before the Knights Templar is created. And they first start off as setting up hospitals and things like that, but then they transform into the ones who were truly protecting the pilgrims that are traveling to Jerusalem on their pilgrimage. And so the Templars are set up with this rouge and a sort of a cover that's what they're doing. But it's the Knights of St. John that are doing it. And I'm going to come back to them in a second. And then you also have another order that is the Teutonic Knights. And so you have a red cross that St. Bernard issues the Templars that is a sort of legacy symbol that goes into history of Red Cross orders. You have the Knights of St. John that is going to take the white cross that is going to become the symbol of the Swiss flag. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then you have the black cross of the Teutonic order. So in the year 1310, the Hospitallers, or the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, they changed their names over the centuries, but it's the same organization, who are also made up of royal bloodlines, but of secondary siblings. But they have to be running and controlling the Knights of St. John. You have to be of very high noble bloodlines, but you're just not the first son. But in 1310, they actually established their first commandeer or station or establishment in Switzerland. And what's interesting about 1310 is that that is 3 years after the fall of the Knights Templar in 1307. Mm. And so what happens at the fall of Templars is that you have Templars that are going to scramble over into the Teutonic Knights, which is the German, Norse sort of aspect of the Knight Orders. And you're going to have the Templars that are going to go to Scotland, that are going to be protected by Robert the Bruce and the Sinclairs. The Sinclairs are the individuals that are going to sponsor the new Freemasonry organization from many of the adepts, including Dumont, the first Grand Master of the Knights Templar after their fall, as they continue, and they're going to form the Freemasonry organization. And you're going to have Templars that are going to flee into other orders that are down in Portugal and Spain, which is very, very important in Templar history. And you're going to have their wealth split up into several different directions. So you're going to have their wealth that's going to go with Dumont over to Scotland, and then who knows where after that. You're going to have wealth that is going to be confiscated by the Montesa order, which is created in 1317 in Portugal, for one, by King Denis to take control over the Templar assets there. And you're also going to have, that's the Order of Christ, and then you're going to have the Montesa order by King James II, who is going to take over the Templar assets there. But the bulk of the money and the wealth goes over to Switzerland, where it's going to be protected by their sister Gnostic Brotherhood of Knights, which is the Knights of St. John, and that's going to be the naissance or the beginning of the Swiss banking. People think that it starts up in the 17 or 1800s. That's where it starts. The Teutonic Knights have more of a Pan-Aryan ideology to it, and that's overlaid again by the Gnostics that Hitler picks up on, and he's going to actually establish the SS as based on this Teutonic order, but with this Pan-Aryan philosophy and real ideology of something in the blood. And that's where the SS is going to come from. Now, the banking that funds Nazi Germany is going to come from, obviously, the bankers, which are, largely controlled outside the Vatican Church by the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds are formed from the banking to replace the banking arm that was controlled by the Templars, because they invented modern banking in the West. And so when they collapsed, outside the church, the secret societies wanted to have control of the banking system. The Bauer family, which is the Rothschilds family, and that's going to be largely the banking system and their stable of agent bankers that are going to fund the Nazis to take on the communists, who they funded previous to that, who got out of control, went out of control and went rogue, just as the Nazis would go rogue on them, and then they fund the Allies to defeat both of them. But of course, they don't, continue on with the communists. So that's kind of the broader connections. But I'm sure you got 1,000 questions based on that set of information.
I mean, I guess it's just really interesting because you see Himmler, you're talking about this sort of creation of this myth of the German people being connected to these ancient peoples so that they can claim that they are, of some sort of pure bloodline, to sort of excuse genocide. Yeah. And I think it's actually really interesting that most people think that the Rothschilds are relatively like an old family, but you say that they're actually newcomers in the whole grand scheme of things, because we have to go all the way back to, I suppose, like Nimrod or something like this when we talk about Freemasonry. I think it's really interesting when regimes sort of take on these occultic kinds of narratives, for lack of a better term. And one of the things they do is they use a lot of ritual. And we see a lot of rituals being performed today to usher in something like the new normal, right? Like mandated mask wearing. So, what was the importance of ritual to the Knights Templar? What were some of the rituals they may have participated in? If you know of any, you mentioned some others in a different interview. But and what is the importance of ritual to the Gnostic beliefs, and why do we see these play out in popular culture all the time? I know that's a lot of questions, but I feel like you can do a lot with what I just said. So
In polytheism, one of their main characteristics are rituals and allegories, which is, pretty predominant as you look at secret societies, because they are of the same root and of the same sort of religion, particularly as Gnosticism or Theosophy, are the two religions of the modern era for the secret societies. That goes back to the original religions of Nimrod, as you were mentioning, and to the antediluvian past, and they are knowledge cults. So they're always after gnosis and knowledge, and they believe that the two keys to immortality or attaining godhood is, one is having immortality, and the other one is controlling knowledge. And so you have to have enough knowledge and to be taught this knowledge and the mysteries. And so you have these degrees that you go through. The old system, most people are familiar, 3 degrees, and with the Scottish Rite, which is more recent, would be 33 degrees, but that's just splitting the original 3 into 11 different sort of steps. And so this is the knowledge that they're learning to become an adept. And then there are higher degrees after that. It's hard to know how many. And so this information is taught in rituals, in allegories, to protect that information from the mundane, as they would call it, from people who aren't part of the bloodlines, and they don't want them to have that information, which is why they're called secret societies. They want to keep their information secret. And it's to honor their history and to honor their genealogies and to honor their gods. So rituals are designed to do that. Originally, when you have Adam and Eve and then you have the Seth line, you don't have any of this rituals that's entering into the worship. And in monotheism, and even when Israel is set up, they are only given a very limited amount of things to be done for atonement and for worshiping him, and things like long sort of rituals and allegories and mysteries and carving of stones and idolatry. All of that is forbidden, and it does come back in when you have the formation of the Roman Church at the time of Constantine, because I think there's a merging of Mithraism and some other Gnostic religions of that time, because it's a religion that's designed to unite the empire under Constantine's rules. So it has some polytheist overlays on it, and we still have some of that idolatry and imagery even to this day, including changing the Sabbath. So, but rituals that are done at the lower level are, giving pieces of the information. You're not provided the true knowledge until you hit a debt status, and you're not doing the true rituals of worship that would include sacrifice and drinking of blood and things like that at the adept level. So only as you get to the 3rd degree in the old York Rite system and 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite are you going to be involved in that. And you're going to have a lot of sexual rituals that are involved as well. So, and all of this has its history in polytheism past, because they believe they are the original religion, and that monotheism went rogue and is a counterfeit religion of their original religion. So you can see they're absolutely poles apart from monotheism, just from their perspective. And each other calls each other the dark ones, and each one calls themselves the children of light or the people of light. And so they are, they're never going to sort of peacefully coexist because they're totally opposite. But which is part of the belief system of Gnosticism and Polytheism is that good and evil are always and perpetually at war, and nobody ever wins. In monotheism, we do get a winner, and that happens in the end time. But in the meantime, you've got these two sort of forces that are controlling and manipulating humankind. And it's going to play out until the end time comes. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what you're asking about in terms of the rituals, why they have the rituals, and what the religion is all about.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful. So speaking of like sort of ritualistic imagery and paying homage to the gods that they may believe in popular culture lately, we've seen a lot of flood imagery, a lot of water and umbrellas and rain. Do you think this could be an allusion to Atlantis, and why is Atlantis important?
Well, I think it is. I mean, the flood is a significant piece of polytheist religions as well. And, you were mentioning earlier, and it's true that you have the flood story and the giant story that is, for the most part connected together. And you have the giants are the ones who are causing the flood, and that's on all continents around the world except Antarctica. And who knows what we'll find there soon. And you have the flood that is, basically attributed, according to the Gnostics, as being caused by the God of the Bible, and he is the evil God. And it's part of what he does to hurt humankind, whereas the Gnostics like to call themselves the ones who are providing knowledge and trying to help humankind against the oppressive God of the Bible.
Right.
So when you have that imagery of the flood, that's a huge sort of historical turning point for both monotheists and Gnostics. They just have two lenses in terms of how they're going to view who was good, who was bad, and what that outcome kind of looked like. And so when we look at how they want people to view the flood and the separation, and then what happened before the flood, that's the golden age. That's the age that Atlantis reigned in. And understand that the Nazis that we were talking about take their belief system back to very much an Atlantis kind of island called Thule and or Asgard from the north side, because they're kind of interrelated. And they could be parts of the Atlantean Empire, or they could be a separate civilization altogether, but it sounds very, very similar to Atlantis. And this was both Thule and Atlantis were reigned over by the giants, by the Nephilim before the flood. And they created this great civilization. And I'll slide more now over to Atlantis, but just underline that real ideology, which is Rosicrucian ideology, which was overlaid into Theosophy, which morphed into Ariosophy, is that something in the blood that they take their genealogies back to these giants of prehistory. And Atlantis had 10 parts to its empire, all ruled over by Nephilim, and all as the offspring of Poseidon and Cleito, or Clymene, depending on which version that you're reading, and or Iapetus as the god. But he's the god of the sea, and he produces 10 demigod Titan kings. These are the heroes of Greek mythology. These are the Nephilim. So as Zeus would have been the father of Hercules through a human female, that would be the same as what Poseidon is doing here in creating through human females these demigod kings. And this was the ultimate civilization in the antediluvian world, Atlantis, ruled by demigods. Demigods defined in its ancient sense as the offspring of gods and human females. So just as Genesis 6:1 through 4 talks about, Poseidon is giving a polytheist account of what's going on before the flood. And Atlantis is trying to take over the whole world.
Right.
Wants to set up a world government with its polytheist religion. And this is the new Atlantis that Francis Bacon, uses as an allegory for the end time with the religion of theosophy that comes out of Gnosticism, designed to be the religion that works in harmony with knowledge works in harmony with the religion in the end time and is ruled over by this polytheist religion and reigned over by descendants out of Atlantis.
Right.
And so when we look at what the Club of Rome is doing today, so to roll this forward, they're formed in 1968, maybe 1967, but 67 to 69 is the formation, and they come into sort of full view more in the 70s, and they have divided the world into 10 blocks of nations, trading blocks, groups of nations, whatever you want to call them, that they want to form this world government on, that they call the New Atlantis for the New Age, and the New Golden Age that is being promised through New Age, which is an extension out of Theosophy, which was created by Gnosticism. Yeah, so like with, and you have Theosophy being sort of, I guess, told to us is created by Blavatsky in about the 1880s, but as I said, it's really just a repackaged form of Gnosticism. Right. But it's this Theosophy that is gaining a lot of momentum going into the 1900s, right, that the Nazis are going to adopt, but they're going to overlay on Theosophy their Aryan philosophy, right? And that's why they call it Ariosophy, which kind of goes rogue from Theosophy and also overlays the Vril ideology and Grail ideology, and with that distinct pan-Aryan type of overlay is going to be very much opposed to who they would presume to be the descendants of Israel, which would be the Jewish people. And that's why they're going to have a Holocaust, because they're at war with God's people, and they're trying to create the new Reich, the new 1,000-year reign that Hitler wants to be like a Messiah-type figure over. So they create this Ariosophical religion, as they called it, that's all occult, and they call it the Reich Church in 1933. And of course, Wagner, who is a big proponent of providing a lot of the intellectual dynamite for the Grail ideology that is adopted into Nazism, Hitler's going to listen to and watch a Wagner opera before he establishes the Reich Church. And so this is that whole belief system that they're trying to reestablish, that they say would be that antediluvian religion, and reestablishing that golden age or the new Atlantis.
Yeah, they were searching for Atlantis, I believe, at some point, or the Spear of Destiny as well. They were, I mean, just like any other society that you've mentioned, were collecting artifacts, just as the Templars were. I believe that's probably what their actual mission was, to collect these artifacts and to keep them somewhere. And it's really interesting because these societies have been working on this project for quite a while, it seems. Why has it taken so long? I think we've seen a lot of the effects now, recently. You know, when we talk about the quest for sort of the fountain of youth or immortality, we can sort of see that in transhumanism, if you're familiar with that kind of ideology. So I don't know. I'm not sure why it's taken so long. Is it just because they keep failing? Is it because egomaniacs like Hitler think that they're the Messiah? Or is it just predestined to take a certain number of years for everything to kind of come to a head?
Well, both. I mean, so the first thing is that I'll say that there is a set amount of time that only God knows to fulfill the names of the book of life that was written before creation. So, and the end time is not going to happen before God removes the restrainer. So now enter into the aspect that the occult forces want to bring about the end time any time before the ordained time to try and discredit God and add to the deception. But they'll accept the ordained time, of course, because they want to bring on the end time and have that showdown with God. But within the organizational structure, not only in the West, but around the world, they are directionally working in the same direction, but you have rival factions.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, and I don't know whether you've ever seen that those movies or TV series that was called Highlander, which was sort of a fairy aspect to the Nephilim, that there can only be one.
Right.
At the end, that's really what's being fought out between all of these thrones, and Game of Thrones would be another allegory of that, where there can only be one Messiah. One false Messiah, one Antichrist family that is going to be set up to rule the world, and their family will be, in their belief system, that one set above all the other Nephilim bloodlines. Even though they'll be part of the ruling elite, there's still only one at the top. So they're all fighting to be that family.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps happening, like Hitler or like Aleister Crowley would call himself the Antichrist. So it's kind of interesting, like, that they're competing to bring that about. And speaking of popular culture, I heard you mention something about Star Wars, and I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to ask you how Star Wars is based in either Gnosticism or, I guess, Rosicrucian philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I would preface what I'm going to talk about is that almost all of our science fiction, horror, and entertainment, literature, movie-wise, opera-wise, anything that's got to do with entertainment basically runs with that sort of understanding. So, and Star Wars makes a fairly easy analogy as to what I'm talking about. And so you have two forces. One's the good force, one's the evil force, and it's playing out through the humans,
right,
who are in the physical world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the good guys are the ones who are very much like an Eastern Vedic religion or Tibetan religion, and those are the members of the Jedi who have a bloodline and a powerful source and power that is not equated to the average human, but just the bloodlines, right? So again, you can see that royal bloodline sort of issue. And then you have the Eastern religion that is basically what's talked about, just as you have the good force and the evil force, is that duality of good and evil that are in perpetual combat, and none ever really gains the upper hand, just as the Star Wars continues forever, because that's the nature of the religion, and that they'll always be fighting each other out. And of course, you have within Star Wars characters that are modeled on prehistory. So, I mean, you have Luke Skywalker, and Skywalker is pretty easy understanding of that's talking about an alien or something from another planet or an angel, and it was not originally Luke, it was actually Loki Skywalker from the Norse pantheon.
Really?
And so they just transliterated that. And then you have, Anakim, which is, comes from the Rephaim tribe of the Anak that are after the flood. And so this thing just sort of goes, if you just look at all of the different names and all of the different references that they have, it is just loaded with that historical genealogy and belief system and history that is typical of most entertainment, because they hide that within the allegories. And that makes sense because that's what the religion is built on, and they're trying to keep that information from the mundane. But those people who are watching the entertainment, who have been taught through the mysteries, they understand the language and exactly the messages that are being communicated.
Yeah. Can you briefly explain what you call the alien deception?
Yeah, it's something that we have to take seriously. And we have to understand that there's way too much going on here for it not to be used as a deception for the end time, or a way of moving people in a manner to prepare them for things that they want us to accept. When you have that much information on it, and they seem to be marching towards this unveiling and introduction of them that will unite people, just as in all the movies where we find out we're not alone on the earth, that everybody comes together and they get their one world government.
Right.
And they need that to have their world religion and to evolve into godhoods in the new age as the belief system goes. This is what is going to be happening in the end time in a number of different ways. But I don't believe these aliens are going to be from another planet. I actually think we're going to see them, and I think that we're just going to be lied to as to who they are. So a lot of people in Christianity just think it's demons and it's fallen angels. And the demons, of course, are going to need a body.
Okay, but
angels are shapeshifters. Demons are bodiless spirits of the giants. So
okay, right.
when immortality was taken away, their bodies weren't permitted to go to sleep, according to Enoch, and they weren't permitted to go into heaven, and they roamed the earth. And these are the demons and the evil spirits Jesus is dealing with, and Legion would be the most important ones. And as he says, they thirst. They go to dry places and they're thirsting for a body to possess so that they can actually interact and have a little bit of rest.
Okay, I see.
In a physical form. So I don't think it's the demons, unless for somehow, some way, they've been given bodies that they can actually enter into, and it won't be this contested relationship that happens in demon possession. It's not an avatar effect. It's that's why you get head spinning and things like that, because the host isn't wanting to have that demon spirit in. So I think those bodiless spirits will play an end in the end time. But from the shape-shifting capability, I would look at that from the angels. But they also created, according to the occult belief system, all of these other different creatures in prehistory. And in their tradition, they survive. And, or perhaps even recreated again after the flood. So you have, not only the centaurs and Pegasus and all of these other beings that are out there, but also beings like the elementals, which are part of the fairy. They're the fourth class of the fairies, and these are the little people.
Right.
And they have three different classifications of those. And in the ugly class, which are gnomes and hobbits and dwarves and things like that, you've got one that is called the Grey Neighbors or the Greys, and they have flying machines, and they come through fairy mounds or portals, and they kidnap people. And I put in my book a couple of descriptions of those encounters and those kidnappings. And if you didn't know I was describing a fairy kidnapping and encounter, you'd swear it was an alien Grey.
Right. There has been... go ahead, Gary.
I was going to say, then there's also a fourth class that is a lot of times grouped in the elementals. They're higher than the elementals, which are the lowest class, because they serve the gods and the Nephilim, guarding the genealogies, guarding the technology, and making weapons and all sorts of things, just as you see them in the Lord of the Rings. But they're working for the giants and the gods. And there's a fourth class that is a little bit higher, and that's called the salamanders, and they're reptilian. And I think that's where we get kind of that reptilian alien coming from. Or I know and I have to say for the record that I think the original Nephilim from the Seraphim Watchers had the same serpent faces as well, and that's part of the reptilian serpent seed, part of Genesis 3:15. But we also have another classification of individual that's called the Nakash, that before it was stripped of its intelligence, its speech, its arms, and its legs, was an intelligent, walking, talking human being, or human-like being, that is working with Satan to deceive Adam and Eve in Eden. And if they were able to save some of these other beings, either off-world, in the earth, however you want to have it, in stasis, or recreated them again in a second incursion, which again, those angels would have gone to the abyss for that second crime, and I lean to second incursion, then you would have these beings that are coming through portals from different dimensions, that seemingly the alien spaceships that we see all come through different dimensions, which makes sense. And I think we're being told they're from other planets as part of the deception, as opposed to part of the original rebellion and the Nephilim-like creations that were created both before and after the flood.
That's really interesting. And I mean, there have been not a lot of books, but there have been some books written about the parallels between alien abduction and fairy abduction and folklore. And I think it's really interesting that there's an overlap there. Personally, just to set the record straight, I don't think there are aliens, but that's just me. And I think it's very interesting that they're using a lot of this propaganda. I think, especially at this time, I believe to distract people from, real other agendas that are more pressing. So I'll leave you with this final question. Is the West the good knight bringing democracy to the world and what they call fighting the good fight? Or is it an allegory for the inverse, which I find a lot of Gnosticism to sort of just be, they just flip everything over onto the inverse? Or like a bad guy ushering in the New World Order, just as the Knights Templar sought out to do. Like, I find that to be very interesting, this sort of image that the West wants to portray itself as. I'm not even saying that the West is bad or good. It's just, let's talk about America specifically. They always portray themselves as like the good guys bringing in democracy.
Yeah. Well, let's first understand that most constitutions that we have in the world today are based on the American Constitution and the American Revolution. And then let's also introduce the idea that well over half of the original writers of the Constitution and the founding fathers of the United States were Masonic and Gnostic. And what they wrote into the Constitution was more to protect the Gnostic religion from persecution of the Roman Church than to protect Christian religions. But in a way, I think that they could use that against Christians in the end time, which I think we're starting to see the Constitution being used to promote Christian belief and talk as hate speech and all sorts of horrible things. So I think we're starting to see that transition that it was originally written for. I like democracy because there's at least an ability to try and influence things as opposed to a complete totalitarian state. But I also recognize, and I document, all throughout my book, that the governments are all controlled by the secret societies and the bloodlines who control the secret societies. And so they're kind of moving things in a direction, but they can't move it efficiently. And that's the thing they really have against Western democracy. But, when you get elections that say, like, when you have, I'll use an older one, let's say Bush and Gore, they're both Gnostics, they're both secret societies, both skull and bones, and their parents were part of the bloodlines, the pseudo-bloodlines, as they're trying to ennoble those bloodlines with the Europeans. And so you're getting two options of the same thing. One moves it a little bit more quickly in the direction of globalism than the other, but they're all marching for globalism. And I wonder whether or not Trump was, he just wanted more power and he went rogue, and that's why they hate him so much, and he's slowing down the globalism aspect. But understand that President Trump isn't against globalism.
No.
It's just that he wants the U.S. to have more power. And that's the same statement, and I'm not saying that he's in cahoots with Putin, or President Xi, but they're both saying we don't like the European model of this world order. We want to have more power and control within it. And those are the tensions that are happening. So it's all moving in that direction, but democracy has not been as easily controlled as what they would have liked it to have been.
Yeah.
Even though they're trying to pull the strings from the background. So, but at the end of the day, if they get control of who the nominees are, which they tend to have for the leaders of the country, then they essentially are moving it in that direction. It's just whatever that speed is going to be. So I like democracy, but I know it's also used to promote globalism. And I also don't think that you would have globalism in the way that the Europeans would envision setting up world government if you had the totalitarians in control. In other words, they would try and do it through war, which has been tried throughout history, right? And it always fails because the world's too big and it takes too much money and it takes too much time, and and eventually they lose. They need to take control over world government by having the building blocks in place. And so they need to build momentum for globalism, momentum for world government, but they're going to need the universal religion to bring that about first. And you're going to need the false prophets bringing about the prophecies of doom to scare everybody, because, as we're being prepared for with all of their apocalyptic statements, that if you don't convert to this religion, we're going to be destroyed from the face of the earth. And that's why all the globalists are using these transnational doctrines, whether or not it's global warming or peak oil or overpopulation or pollution. We can't grow enough food. Everything that they can throw at the world that crosses borders and gets people pointed in the direction to run and be cattle herded into world government by the globalists. That's what they're trying to do, so they can essentially do a quick coup d'etat and take over control of the world.
Mm-hmm. So you keep talking about in your book, as well as just now, the universal religion. Is it Gnosticism, or is it sort of like a Catholicism kind of operating under Gnosticism, like a sort of, it looks like Catholicism, but it's not? What do you think the universal religion will be?
I think if the Western Gnostics get their way in secret societies, they're going to create the new Babylon through the Catholic Church. And that's why they reestablished the Jesuits within the Catholic Church, along with Ignatius of Loyola being funded by the Montesa order, which I talked about earlier, and Francis Borgia, who becomes the third Grand Master and gets control of the Vatican banking that gets moved to Switzerland by 1570.
Right.
And they are, they're there to deliver Catholicism into the New Babylon to become this polytheist religion from within. And so, just as in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter's talking about writing from Babylon. He's writing from Rome. Babylon, as you take that back to Greek, was a understood term for early Christians and Jewish people. Some people from the Gnostics call it the Pesher Code. What Babylon was, a Pesher Code, an allegory for Rome. And just as Rome has 7 hills that the Universal Catholic Church already sits on, I think they're going to be converted to this polytheist religion, and they are very sort of crazy with all the Mary apparitions, whether it's Lourdes or it's Fatima, or it's Medjugorje, or it is the apparition that Ignatius of Loyola has that says you're going to become a soldier and you're going to convert the Roman Catholic Church through Jesuits. And now you have a Jesuit pope that's in place that's rightfully recognized the happenings and the visions and the initiations of these 6 to 10 children, as I recall, who are going to come out with these prophecies of doom. I think we should look towards that, but it's going to be a religion that denies Jesus as being the Son of God, and they're going to come out with proof both from the Vatican and from the secret societies, because they have control over the Vatican, to say that Jesus did not die on the cross.
I see a lot of this playing out in, secularism, the far left sort of. I feel like the universal religion could also look like what the far left is touting about globalism, and we're all in this together, and meanwhile all of their policies are wreaking absolute havoc on normal everyday citizens.
Understand that left-wing politics is social masonry, and it was created by the Gnostics. So it's a tool to lead people away from God. Right? It's a tool to get into the world government and then impose their true religion. I mean, all the things that they teach about evolution, they're going to throw those aside when they're ready to take control.
Interesting.
And so, so I think we need to be prepared for all of the manipulation that's going on and understand where that manipulation is coming from. They have control of the education system as well, both inside the Catholic Church through the Jesuits, and then with the creation of the Royal Society that's controlled science and education ever since. And it goes back to the creation of the 7 sacred sciences and the religion and secret societies that was spawned out of it in the time of Enoch, son of Cain. And those stated goals in Masonic history were to not give God credit for anything, to degrade God, to lead people away from God, and to honor and worship the pantheon of gods. And you see all of that in not only left-wing politics and in education today. They're doing the same goals as they were before the flood.
Fascinating. Well, Gary, is there anything you want to plug while you're here?
Well, yeah, I would say go to my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. It's www.genesis6conspiracy.com, and on there I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on my book. So you get a good feel for the book and the subjects and see whether or not that might be the book for you. You can hook over to barnesandnoble.com or amazon.com or the Kindle version, or get a signed copy from me. And if you want to get a hold of me, I have access there through email on my website. And the email that's on the website is genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. So it's fairly easy to remember. Genesis 6 again, the number 6 conspiracy@gmail.com. And if you want information on the Jesuits that I was talking about, I don't put Jesuits in my book a lot, but I have an extraordinary 3-part series on it. I give all the basis for the creation of the Jesuits. I didn't want the Jesuit thing to distract from the rest of the book, because there's so much
there's a lot
division on that. But I got a 3-part series on that for people that just walks you through step by step on how they're connected to the Knights Templar, and how they're connected to bringing about the Mary cult and the universal religion.